Granddad, can you tell me about some of the experiences you had with racism at your church in Norfolk?
Sure. That was my first church out of seminary. It was in First Presbyterian Church, South Norfolk at the time. It's now in the city of Chesapeake. And when I went there, everything seemed fine. I enjoyed meeting all the people. Everything looked like a very nice congregation. And it took a while before I realized that there were people with strong issues on integration, which was becoming a popular subject in those days. And some communities were closing swimming pools to avoid integration, things like that. And a few of my elders began to ask me questions, not at session meeting, but privately, how I felt about it. And I would express my views about being open to integration and open to people of all races coming to our church. That's when I realized the extent of the concern in my congregation. And after a while, it began to become evident even in the session meetings that there was strong opinions, pro and con on that. The majority of the session were against integration. And I soon learned that they had actually earlier put on the books of the session a vote that no colored person should come into our sanctuary to worship. And they gave instructions in that for the ushers what they should do if that happened. When I learned that, I got very upset and I said, you cannot do this. It's not only against the moral righteousness of the church, but it's against the laws of our book of church order of our denomination. And that's when they became very upset with me for upholding the right of people to come in. And I began to get pretty open harassment after that, and some of the elders would shake their fist at me and say things that were very upsetting. Just before worship on a Sunday morning, they would catch me in the hallway just before I went into the pulpit area and say those things and shake their fist and all that and try to rattle me. And then other issues began to be pretty powerful about coming to my house. And we got literature on the front porch every morning. And the literature was like it came from the Ku Klux Klan and accusing most ministers of being communists and things of that nature. And that got pretty belligerent. And one day we even found in our kitchen a snake. Could have been accidentally put there, but given the background, the context of what was going on, I was suspicious that it might have put there to frighten us, try to get us to leave. And so I took the family, my wife and 4 children, to her mother's at their vacation house in North Carolina for the summer, just so that I wouldn't have to worry about them while we were dealing with this issue at church. After a while, in talking to others in the congregation, I began to realize that it was mainly in this session that the strong segregationist views were held. And so I began to figure out ways to get around that, and did, using the book of order, book of church order we called it. And over a period of months, and with the guidance and help of presbytery, was able to get the congregation to come and call a congregational meeting and install a vote that would make it clear that the session had to adopt the rotation system, which did not exist then. And that caused this group that was in power to realize they had to rotate off the session, and that'd be the end of their power and authority over the congregation. When that vote was taken, they stood up and stomped out of the church and yelled back at me they were going to ruin me, things of that nature. It was a very nasty conclusion to that congregational meeting. They were the people of power and money, and they tried to stop giving their money to the church again force us out. That was the tactic of those days of churches, of leaders in churches to force ministers to leave, and they would call somebody that they liked better that would be open to their views. And I resisted all of that, and we started moving toward elections of different elders. And then I decided it was time to get on with the process of healing, and I'd go to visit these people that had been so mad, and others to get their views and try to discuss with them how we could be, I guess, reconciled. And they were ardent. They were not open to that, and they made me very upset and made it very clear that it was not going to happen, you know, not over my dead body kind of thing. And so after year two of, that was about year two of my time there, maybe 2.5 years there. And so I talked to the people of Presbytery, and they agreed with me that it was time for me to move on and have somebody come in that would be a reconciler, that was not the person that caused the problem. You know, I was known as the hatchet man that came in and caused the thing to be so upsetting. So I was open to that and let the word get out, and next thing I know, I got a telephone call to leave and come to a town I'd never been to before called Harrisburg, Virginia, to start a new church, and that was the end of that time I had in Norfolk. But it was very open, very nasty. Other churches in our area had the same kind of issues. Elders and other churches nearby, Presbyterian churches, the elders would take the hymn books and bang on the pews during the minister's sermon to try to drive him out. That was their tactic for every congregation. So it was a very, very difficult time, and people were very mad about all those things going on in the church. I don't think, maybe all that had started after the Supreme Court had come up with the integration of public schools, and that had started the whole issue going on. But anyway, it wasn't a fun first 3 years of my ministry.
Did you run into as much racism or the same kinds of problems here in Harrisonburg?
Not the same kind, because when I was here and was free to start a church from the ground up, I made it clear, and the others that I met and got to come and help start it, that we were going to be a church open and integrated, and we put out a brochure which we scattered across town and put indoors that we were a new church inviting people, and this was going to be a church open to all races. And so I was determined that we would not fight that battle again within a congregation, that they would know where we stood before they got there. So I didn't have that issue within Trinity, but it did hit me again in the city, or the town of Harrisburg. And so it began then to be an issue between me and I guess by that time involving Trinity as such, with the same kind of issues, but this time with the town leaders and their efforts to get me removed. The same kind of tactics, but they weren't in my congregation, so they couldn't use the same methods. So anyway, I met the same kind of resistance here. When I moved to Harrisburg, there were signs downtown for bathrooms, segregated, you know, whites only bathrooms, whites only water fountains, things like that. So it was very much in Harrisburg, but it never got within Trinity, just because we made it clear from the start that we weren't open to that kind of thinking.
Why were they angry with you in town then? Why were leaders of Harrisonburg angry with you?
Well, they were angry with me because of my stance on being open to all races.
Well, how did they know about your stance being open to all races?
Well, they saw the brochure that we had distributed. They knew that's what we stood for as a new congregation being started. And after a while, I was asked to be the chair or the president of an organization in town called the Council on Human Relations. And that was mostly members of Harrisonburg's Northeast community, which was mostly colored people. We now call them the blacks in Harrisonburg. It was a small group as it is today. But we met together. They were glad that they had some white people interested in their cause, and there were several of us, any number of professors from the Mennonite college at that time, EMC, and we met, and we had protests, and we had votes, and we appeared at places, and I got a lot of people very upset with us in the town. Things like one time I guess the Supreme Court had their vote on the civil rights, what did they call it? Anyway, open housing was a result of that particular law, someplace in 1964 or 1965. And that's when the law was passed that you could not, real estate agents could not refuse to show houses to people of all races in their listings. So you couldn't have real estate people showing just white people houses in white neighborhoods, and blacks, that kind of thing. And when that happened, the local television studio interviewed me on camera and asked me my opinions and all this. And I said I thought it was a wonderful thing and it would help our society and all that. Then they interviewed right after me the local Virginia state legislature from our area. I've forgotten the man's name. And he was totally against it all and told about how it would lead to all kind of horrible things. I forgot what all he said, but that kind of gave us a pro and a con group there, and was very agitated, and caused me to be known around town as that person fighting for integration in that open way, and that made him very upset.
Wow.
There were people who called members of my church and would say, "You've got to get rid of that minister," and they would try to pressure them. I remember various people in the congregation who got so mad at them that they yelled at them on the telephone. They told me about it later when the phone calls came, and they would. One woman, most of you probably don't know Helen Swink at the time, Helen Poindexter. She was one of those, and she talked about how she found herself jumping up and down on her bed with the phone on her ear, yelling at the man talking to her on the other end, after he had said, you need to get rid of that minister of yours. So the congregation was behind me the whole way, and I didn't have any troubles or any fear of Trinity wanting to move me on.
Yeah. I love it. You're so mad you jumped up and down on the bed.
Yeah, she was jumping up and down the bed. Yeah, Helen was much younger then, and she could do that. Yeah.
Well, did you go to any marches, Granddad?
Yeah, I took a busload of people from here through the Council on Human Relations, and there were about 40 of us on the bus. About 20 were white people and 20 were blacks. And we went to the Poor People's March in Washington, and found that very exhilarating, very meaningful, and that was a very important thing that we had done in those days. And we had issues with that. The driver that drove us there was very mad at me. When I went up to shake his hand to thank him for driving us, he folded his arms and turned his back on me, and he said, "I won't shake hands with the likes of you." But he drove us. He was required to. He was hired to. And when we got halfway there, we stopped for some coffee. I remember this incident because Front Royal, we went to a restaurant there and went in, all of us together, to order a snack or something. And they refused to serve us. The waitresses stood back with their arms folded, and they wouldn't serve us because we were half black and half white in the group. And so that was when I said to one of the waitresses, I said, "Will you serve me a cup of coffee?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Fine, I want 40 cups of coffee." And she looked at the other waitresses and shrugged, And they all got the coffee, they all came to me and they began to put coffee in front of me, and I would pass it back to the rest. The other people would come behind me, they'd pick up the coffee and take it to the folks who were at the tables, and we all sat there and had our coffee. Then we drove on to DC. But, you know, open resistance, open, I'm not sure hatred was the word, but resistance was prominent in those days. In the town of Harrisburg as well. It just, Trinity was a little island where that did not happen, and very, very proud of that and of the church for that.
A lot of people are.
Yeah. So we haven't gotten back to that these days, but with different kinds of methods, we see the same kind of extreme racial bigotry going on today. It hasn't gone away, just found different methods of expressing itself. And it probably will until we have a real change at the top and we have better national leadership based on being open to all people and all races. But when that happens, maybe the country can begin to recognize what it means to be an American, and we can follow through on that. I hope that that will be the path we go on.
Me too.
Yeah. So those were the days, my friend.
Those were the days, huh?
Yeah.
No more questions? I guess, Dad, we'll leave it at that, and then on that night of the Q&A, people can ask you questions.
Okay.
Oh, you're doing a Q&A?
You could talk about when we visited, when we worshiped with black congregations.
Oh, yes, I can talk about that too.
Where was
Why?
that?
Because I went with Charles to church a couple times.
Oh, okay.
And I just loved it. You know, I felt really awkward walking in because I was this little white girl and I was the only one. And I was like, I feel like I've gone back in time, being the only little white girl here. And just everybody started hugging on me and everything. And then everybody was really loud and all. I loved it.
Yeah. But our congregation went and visited and worshiped with other black congregations. You remember that?
I don't.
Okay.
We had a house church that was integrated house church on purpose. It was the purpose of the call to that house church to be an integrated house church, and it was in the call was that we would have half and half, and that if 3 people responded or 4, we would make sure that if they were all of one race, we would not have any others come to the house church until we had an equal number of the other race.
Well, how did you make that happen if they weren't members? They just came?
Well, they came to the call to the house church from across town, like the John Wesley Methodist Church heard about it, and a lot of their members came.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just because I had told the Council on New Relations that we were going to start that,
Mm-hmm.
and we hoped we would have help from them, and so in that house church we had very meaningful meetings and decided to do various things in town. I've forgotten what we did in detail, but I joked about it later on. I said, somebody came and interviewed me about it, and I said, well, I've learned after these several years here that our difficulties in that house church are not so much between the blacks and whites, it was between Presbyterians and Methodists. and trying to understand how we could function together, you know.
Tell the story about the time you were asked to go say a prayer someplace in Stanton and you were on the radio and you got you got turned off.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
yeah. That was it might have been 4th of July, it might have been Armistice Day. It was a public, civil holiday.
Yeah.
And people they had asked our local military unit in Stanton, and I was the chaplain by that time. I was
Navy chaplain.
I think I was about a lieutenant commander in the Navy, but I was their chaplain, and so they asked me if I wouldn't respond to that request. So I went to the cemetery where they had this event, and they had me on the radio, and I had a regular speech or a sermon. I had a sermon. And so I was preaching on the radio, and in that sermon, I said, we stand here at this cemetery today and honor those who gave their life World War II. And I said, the problem that I see here is that across town there's another cemetery where they have buried the soldiers who were of another race. And I said, I wish that at least when our soldiers died on the battlefield and came home to be buried, they could be buried together in the same cemetery. And that's where I learned later that the radio cut me off, and the rest of that sermon was not heard. And normally the Stanton newspaper made it a front page thing about that event every year, and that year there was nothing about it. It's just like it didn't happen. So, yeah, that was another event where I got cut off pretty quick.